Hey everyone, this is Gary Kayye. Welcome back. This time our subject matter expert is David Anderson, the founder and CEO of Mimo Monitors. David, how are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm doing well. You introduced a product that was the first that I know of, AVoverIP display, specifically aimed at UCC Spaces. I think one of the biggest value propositions of AVoverIP and UCC from a simplicity standpoint is power over Ethernet. Now, I don't know how big we can get with power over Ethernet, and I don't know how much sort of the future of that holds in UCC Spaces, but I'd love to get your take on it because, as you know, I've been going around talking about AV over IP for the last 2 years.
Yes, and I've watched some of your programs, and they're actually very good. They just don't really fit within the UCC, which is kind of what I want to talk about here because the Series 1 that we did with Google is, again, to my knowledge, the first AV over IP connected display for UCC as well. So now, as it comes to PoE, the standards go up to I think 100 watts now. I don't know how practical that is, honestly. But once we got past 802.3 AT beyond 25 watts, that opens up quite a lot. If you know Mimo, what we focus on is small. We don't make 65-inch big screens. The largest product we make is 32, and so and most of our stuff is 10 or 15 inches, which really allows us to be able to power anything over PoE.
So, but in let's talk about first traditional UCC spaces that we have today: meeting rooms, conference rooms, boardrooms. There's two opportunities here, and I think there's two obvious places. Number one is that product on the table that's going to ultimately drive the content in the rest of the room, right? So you do that magical connection using Zoom or Teams or Cisco or whoever you're using. You have that one-touch connect, and now even Google Meet, obviously with your product, one-touch connection. You get it on the screen. There's some magic behind that, but also you look at the room signs that are outside the rooms that are used for booking rooms like this, and for that matter, not just for UCC spaces, but used to book facility-wide. I'm assuming that you're looking at that as well because AV over IP would make that deployment simpler for an integrator.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at UCC today, and I'm talking about the camera PC touch controller solutions, the PC is running some sort of soft codec. It really wants to be behind the big screen at the front of the room, right?
Right.
Which means the controller wants to be, but the controller wants to be on the table. So now you're going to have to connect the two. Now, if you're in a tiny little huddle room, you can just connect them. If you're not, you get into connection issues because what you're trying to do is extend traditional PC interfaces, USB and HDMI and stuff like that, which really were not designed to be
short distances.
Which were designed for short distances, and you're trying to extend them 10, 15, 20, 30 feet, or as you talk about the sign on the wall, you could, by the time you go up through the wall and up and over and back down and stuff like that, you could be 50, 60 feet or more. So what we're looking to do, and what we already announced with Google, is to extend AV over IP into the UCC space.
So take me through sort of like a future vision of this, because right now everything's connected USB. Do you see AV over IP with all the USB devices as well? And if that's the case, can we remove the computer from the room and actually have one computer sort of driving multiple rooms simultaneously with multiple versions of the app maybe launched from wherever the PC is? Is that what your vision is?
Having some, call it cloud-based PC, really isn't I suppose that might be possible in the future. That isn't the near-term vision.
Okay.
Our near-term vision is actually taking the existing PC interfaces and using Ethernet technology and PoE to be able to extend those. And the reason why we're doing that is because to get to the vision you just described would require Microsoft and Zoom and those guys to also be involved into that,
Yeah.
because now the codecs are living in the cloud and stuff like that, and the PCs are pretty busy doing all the coding and encoding and reducing bandwidth and collecting 50 people's video feeds and putting that all together. So the PCs are pretty busy. So I mean, if you look at what we're doing, what we're looking to do is basically repackage the PC interfaces into Ethernet packets.
Okay.
And so it's transparent to the PC. In fact, we took one of our new products and connected it. We were also involved with Google in the last version, the previous version of the Google Meet kit as well. And we took our new hardware and connected it to the old Google Meet. And it works just perfectly fine because it doesn't know any different. It doesn't see, it still sees USB connections. They just happen to be over an Ethernet line.
Okay. Okay. So then in your vision for this, then obviously companies like camera companies and mic companies and speaker companies would also go over IP as well, which technically already they have the capability to do on the audio side. The mic and the speakers can obviously be IP. The camera, though, is the piece that we haven't gotten there yet. Right now is still USB. But you see a time where, because I think that, as we go outside of these small room spaces and get into larger spaces, going AV over IP would definitely simplify things for the integrator and allow the integrator to offer more services ultimately as well, because now you're not confined to that one system in one space. You're actually bringing it out to the entire facility, because once it's on the network, I can do anything with it.
Yeah, I mean, you can, well, obviously there are, I don't know about UCC Spaces. There are IP-based cameras. They call them security cameras. But
Yeah.
so that technology already exists. Now, whether it works well in UCC, I'm not a camera expert. But yeah, once it's on the network, you have all the flexibility. And the big thing that we see with AV over IP is, if you're extending existing interfaces, then you're into custom cabling and all that kind of stuff, which means you're building your room around the hardware you have. And when you get into, sorry to pull this back to something like COVID, but when you get into COVID, where you're now in a process of maybe wanting to reconfigure your spaces, it's would be easier if all it was just standard Ethernet cabling, because it's everywhere, it's ubiquitous. Every IT guy knows how to run it. You can hide it. There's a million pieces of stuff out there that allows flexibility with Ethernet. Yeah,
and you're correct. IP cameras do exist for security, but the handshaking with the clients is the issue, right? And we don't have that certification from Zoom and Teams and the others. By making sure that when you plug it in, it'll play, you have to do quite a bit of programming to get those to work. And I'm curious how that will come in the future, because theoretically what you could do is you could have everything connect to you ultimately across the network, and you're providing that traffic cop experience to the individual client. And the advantage of that would be that you could build rooms, I'm just thinking about this theoretically, that would be Zoom, Teams, and WebEx certified, because everything's going through you and all you're doing is the last minute handshaking from the controller standpoint. And you make the controller, so therefore you'd be the perfect company to sort of be that central traffic cop for certification. Have you thought about that?
Well, so my response to that is, do Teams and Zoom allow for that kind of configuration? I don't want to get into too much detail, but we had an idea like that in the past, and we explored it with those kinds of companies. And because it was not the direct UI, they weren't willing to support it. So I think there's some adjustment that needs to be made outside of Mimo to really bring that into fruition.
But I think you bring up a really good point, because I do think things are going to change. I mean, you brought up COVID, but we all were still living in a COVID world. Things are going to change, and I think we're going to have to see more compatibility like that between those different companies, and you're sort of that central hub to do that. But one thing is clear: you're saying that that and I agree with you, that integrators need to learn AV over IP quicker rather than later, because there's going to be a lot more opportunities with AV over IP. I think a lot of people realize the opportunity in digital signage was really clear, and the opportunity in digital canvassing and building really big facilities and bringing lots of inputs and putting them on the screen at the same time is really clear. But I think the opportunity in UCC was less clear until you introduced the kit that you did with Google. And it sounds like you have other future products coming. So obviously they should pay attention to what you're doing. Any hints about sort of the directions this might take with AV over IP?
Well, obviously, we don't want to turn this into a product pitch, but we believe in the technology. And there's things that the Series 1 display can't do that are requirements for the Zooms and the Teams of the world. So,
Yeah.
Again, keep your eyes peeled for new directions that we might be taking.
But you agree that AV over IP, I mean, doing AV over IP based AV systems is not the same as doing USB, and definitely not the same as doing HDMI distributed systems. So you agree that they should at least become familiar with this concept of putting AV over a network.
Yes, absolutely. It is where everything is going. I mean, if you look at, let's talk specifically about, sorry, this isn't really a product pitch, but because the announcement came out last week, if you look at the Google or the Series 1 hardware, everything is AV over IP. The camera is, the Mimo is, the microphones are, the speaker mic, everything is connected via Ethernet. So it's coming.
Yeah. And I'm kind of getting the hints here because it is a purpose-built device, and it'd be nice to have either more purpose-built devices or more of a universal device out here. Now, Mimo, I have a question regarding larger format monitors. I know Mimo, you guys have for a long time built smaller, high-performance displays, very specific applications, and I think the largest you have is somewhere around 32 inches. Maybe it's larger, but have you thought about building a larger one? And at what point in time can we go PoE in those kind of environments where we have larger format displays?
To be perfectly honest, the reason why we don't build 60-inch displays is because I don't know how to do it better than LG or Samsung. So, I mean, we're a small or medium-sized business, and I honestly don't know how I would go head-to-head with those guys and bring something that they don't bring. So that's really the reason why we don't do that. But having said that, talking about AV or AV over IP in the UCC space, no, there's really no reason why you couldn't power a 65-inch OLED panel with PoE. The technology exists now. It's standard from IEEE. The PSE equipment exists to be able to supply that kind of power. So now if you look at other, you got me thinking about things outside of UCC, but you can get PoE LED lighting, right?
Yeah.
So you don't need to connect that to AC outlets. You can just run Ethernet. So
I don't know how much different that is from UCC though, because if you think about UCC Spaces, they're wanting the IT department's wanting to manage all parts of it, right? And they want to connect it to some centrally managed system that allows you to know HVAC, occupancy. Now, occupancy is going to be a bigger deal than it ever has been, but lighting is a big part of that, and electricity generates big bills for companies. So going AV over IP would give you the connectivity into all the platforms that they're currently using to manage all the products that are being connected in these systems anyway. So there's a lot of logic in talking about that.
Yeah, I guess I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, you're right. I mean, everything these days is going Ethernet connected. It gives a lot of flexibility. It lets you to be able to control your lighting and your color and presumably flexibility. You can more easily move your lighting around as tables move around within your space or within your building and stuff like that. So there's a lot of parallels. It brings a lot of benefit.
Yeah, and so when you're looking at Zoom rooms, Teams rooms, WebEx rooms, Google Meet rooms, whatever you want to call them, you have a display and you have AVoverIP. I could push the content back to your display and allow you to do some really cool manipulation of the content on the main display in the room by turning your display into a little mini touch-based production switcher in a way. Have you thought about that as well?
Well, so if you look at what we're doing, I mean, we are the big technology jump that now we're going to talk about technology, not a product, but the big technology jump that we've made here is being able to send video, full motion video, both directions across a single Cat5. And there's intelligence in our display to make all that happen. So yeah, there's lots of things that can be done. Now, today, in the immediate term, we're because we want it to be easily deployable within existing solutions, we're, quote, just a display to the PC. So we're not direct control over the UI.
Yeah, but if an integrator is smart,
yeah,
I mean, if integrator wants to go different directions, that once you've got bi-directional communications, I could reprogram that and make that display anything I want it to be.
That can be done, yes. Yep.
Yeah. See, it gets me thinking about all these different possibilities. And I think that's what integrators need. This is the reason why integrators need to really understand AVoverIP and also understand how once the video is on the network, I can send it anywhere, which means that I could, especially with IoT capabilities, with the ability to monitor everything in a room and the video readily available, I see a lot of different directions this could go. And I think Mimo is going to be a company you want to watch because you're obviously on the cutting edge. As you said, although you're not competing with Samsung and LG because of what they do, you are providing a very unique service that they don't provide, and you're providing a value that they can't provide because there isn't that commodity of scale like we've talked about. So,
yeah, I mean, the simple thing is that smaller companies can be a little more nimble, and so we can go after what we believe to be the new direction in small displays and in UCC and AVoverIP, and can innovate in places that some of the larger companies can't.
Exactly. I agree with you 100%. So Mimo sells through Almo. You're here at the Almo's UCC Solution Center. Take a look around. They're here. They're also in a couple other places. Look around the Solution Center. Spend the rest of the day watching all these expert videos from all the different people that we have here that are subject matter experts. But also contact Mimo if you need to get in touch with this. I've been talking with David Anderson, who's the CEO of Mimo Monitors. David, I really appreciate your taking the time and doing this interview today. And of course, Mimo Monitors is at mimomonitors.com. David, thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary.